A rich man stole the last $10 from a homeless girl and her German Shepherd puppy in the freezing snow, laughing as he walked away. He thought his money made him untouchable, but he didn't know a Navy SEAL was watching from across the street, and the soldier was about to teach him a painful lesson that no amount of money could buy. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Chicago in late December was less of a city and more of a test of endurance, with the wind howling off Lake Michigan like a living thing that sought to find every gap in a coat and every crack in a window. Inside the warm, dimly lit interior of The Grind, a corner coffee shop overlooking the magnificent Mile, Jaden Nelson sat with his back pressed firmly against the furthest wall. At 32, Jaden was a man who seemed to occupy space with a quiet, heavy intensity. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL on leave, though he wore no uniform, just a dark flannel shirt under a canvas jacket that did little to hide the width of his shoulders or the thick corded muscle of his neck. His hair was cropped close in a military fade, and his eyes, steely, observant, and restless, scanned the room and the street outside with a habitual vigilance that no amount of holiday cheer could deactivate. A waitress, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, with a kindly face, swung by his table with a glass pot of steaming coffee. "Top you off, hon. You've been staring at that snow for an hour like it's going to attack you," she joked softly. Jaden blinked, the switch in his head flicking momentarily to social mode. "No thanks, Sarah. I'm good. Just watching the world go by. It's different from where I've been lately," he replied, his voice a low rumble that carried a hint of exhaustion. "Well, you stay warm, you hear? It's brutal out there," she said, moving on to the next table. Jaden's gaze drifted back to the plate glass window. The snow was coming down in thick, wet sheets, turning the sidewalk into a gray slush that pedestrians navigated with heads tucked low. Across the street, huddled into the recessed doorway of a high-end boutique that was closed for renovations, sat Mia. She was 20 years old, her once bright, artistic spirit now buried under layers of mismatched oversized coats that smelled of damp wool and exhaust fumes. Her face, though smudged with city grime, held a delicate beauty framed by messy strands of hair escaping a knit beanie. Curled tightly against her leg was Ranger, a 6-month-old German Shepherd puppy with oversized paws and alert triangular ears that twitched at every passing siren. "It's okay, buddy. Just a little longer," Mia whispered, rubbing her cold hands together to generate friction before tucking them back under Rare's fur to share warmth. The puppy whined, a high-pitched sound of discomfort. I know. We'll get some food soon." "Look," she murmured, nodding toward the paper cup, sitting a few feet away on the wet concrete. Inside lay a solitary crumpled $10 bill, a miraculous donation from a hurried tourist earlier that morning. "That's going to get you a real meal tonight, Ranger. Maybe even chicken." The puppy licked her hand, offering the only comfort he could. The peaceful misery of the scene was shattered by the roar of an engine that sounded like a jet taking off. A silver, low-slung sports car gleaming aggressively against the dull winter backdrop swerved toward the curb and screeched to a halt in front of the Obsidian Hotel, a towering monolith of glass and gold directly opposite Jaden's vantage point. A valet bundled in a thick uniform coat rushed out, his breath pluming in the air. The butterfly door of the car swung up and out stepped Caleb Sterling. At 24, Caleb was the epitome of inherited arrogance. Dressed in a bespoke Italian suit beneath a camel hair coat that cost more than Mia would likely see in a lifetime, he tossed his keys through the air without looking. "Catch!" Caleb barked, not checking to see if the man had secured them. "And listen to me. If I see a single scratch on that rim, you'll be paying for it with your next 10 years of salary. Do you understand?" The valet, a man much older than Caleb, bowed his head submissively. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. I'll park it in the VIP garage myself." Caleb sneered. "Good. Don't touch the radio." Jaden watched the exchange, his jaw tightening. He despised bullies, and Caleb projected the aura of a man who had never been punched in the face for running his mouth. Instead of heading into the revolving doors of the hotel, Caleb paused. He adjusted his leather gloves and looked across the sidewalk, his eyes locking onto Mia and Ranger. A cruel idea seemed to dawn on him, evident in the slow, predatory curl of his lip. He sauntered over, his expensive shoes crunching in the snow. Ranger let out a low growl, the hair on his neck standing up. Shh! Ranger, stop it, Mia hissed, terrified of offending a wealthy man who might call the police to chase them away. Caleb stopped directly in front of her, looming over her seated form. Well, well, Caleb drawled, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Creating a bit of an eyesore on my family's property, aren't we? Mia looked up, trembling. I'm sorry, sir. We're just resting. We'll move soon. Caleb laughed, a sharp barking sound. Resting? It looks like loitering to me, and with a beast like that, dangerous. He pointed a gloved finger at Ranger. Is he licensed, or is he just another stray rat like his owner? Mia pulled the dog closer, tears welling in her eyes. He's not a rat. He's my family. Please, just leave us alone. Caleb's eyes drifted to the paper cup. Family needs to eat, right? Is that what this is for? He pointed to the $10 bill. Mia nodded hesitantly, hope wearing with fear. Yes, for dog food. Caleb crouched down, balancing on the balls of his feet, bringing his face uncomfortably close to hers. You know, in the real world, people work for money. They don't just sit in the dirt waiting for handouts. He reached out slowly. Mia flinched, but Caleb didn't strike her. Instead, his fingers plucked the $10 bill from the cup with the precision of a viper strike. Hey, Mia gasped, reaching out instinctively. Please give that back. It's all we have. Caleb stood up, holding the bill out of her reach, inspecting it as if it were contaminated. You don't need this, Caleb sneered, crumpling the money in his fist. Consider it a rental fee for the sidewalk space you've been occupying. Please, sir, Mia cried out, her voice cracking. He's hungry. Caleb just smirked, turning his back on her. Then let him hunt. Isn't that what animals do? He began walking toward the hotel entrance, chuckling to himself. Unbelievable filth, he muttered loud enough for the valet and Jaden to hear. Inside the coffee shop, Jaden had seen enough. The switch flipped completely. The coffee mug hit the table with a dull thud. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, drawing looks from other patrons. Sarah, the waitress, looked over, concerned. Everything okay, hun? Jaden didn't look back. His eyes were fixed on Caleb's retreating back. Keep the change, Sarah, he said, his voice flat and cold as ice. He dropped a 20 on the table and moved toward the door with a stride that was terrifyingly purposeful. He exited the shop, the freezing wind hitting him instantly, but he didn't feel it. He walked across the street, ignoring the traffic, his focus narrowing to a singular point. He passed Mia, who was now sobbing into Rare's fur. Jaden paused for a fraction of a second, his shadow falling over her. Stay here, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle compared to the storm brewing in his eyes. Mia looked up, startled by the stranger, but Jaden was already moving again. He pushed through the revolving doors of the Obsidian Hotel, following the trail of the thief in the Gucci suit. The transition from the biting Chicago winter to the interior of the Obsidian Hotel was jarring. A sudden shift from a grayscale world of ice and exhaust to a technicolor dreamscape of golden velvet. As the heavy brass revolving doors spun Jaden Nelson inside, the howling wind was instantly decapitated, replaced by the hushed ambient hum of high-end HVAC systems and soft classical music drifting from hidden speakers. The air here didn't smell of snow. It smelled of fresh, white leaves, polished mahogany, and money. Jaden stopped for a microsecond to let his eyes adjust to the crystal brilliance of the massive chandeliers hanging from the vated ceiling, casting a warm, expensive glow over the lobby. His canvas jacket, still damp with melted snowflakes, felt heavy and coarse against the pristine environment, marking him immediately as an outsider, an invasive species in an ecosystem designed for the apex predators of capitalism. His boots, heavy and functional, squeaked faintly on the mirror-polished marble floor, a sound that seemed to echo with unnecessary loudness in the cavernous space. He didn't care. His target was 50 feet away, leaning casually against the front desk with the posture of a man who owned the very air everyone else was breathing. Caleb Sterling was busy berating the receptionist. The young employee behind the marble counter was Leo, a slim man in his early 20s with messy brown hair and a uniform that looked a size too big for his anxious frame. Leo was typing furiously, his face flushed with the stress of trying to appease a guest who refused to be pleased. I specifically requested the Lakeview suite on the 45th floor, not the 44th, Caleb was saying, his voice carrying that particular tone of nasal condescension that grated on the nerves like sandpaper. One floor makes a difference in the horizon line. If I wanted a subpar view, I would have booked a motel. Leo stammered, his fingers trembling slightly over the keyboard. I apologize, Mr. Sterling. The 45th is currently undergoing maintenance for a leak. We upgraded you to the presidential on 44 at no extra charge. Caleb sighed, a theatrical exhalation of pure suffering. You people are incompetent. Fix it. Move the leak. I don't care. Jaden approached the desk silently, his movements smooth and predatory, ignoring the few other guests who glanced at his rough attire with curled lips. He stopped 3FT from Caleb, invading the young heir's personal bubble just enough to trigger a subconscious alarm. You dropped something, Jaden said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the ambient music and Caleb's complaining like a knife. Caleb paused, turning slowly, an expression of annoyance already plastered on his face. When he saw Jaden, the annoyance shifted to confusion, and then, as recognition dawned, to amused disdain. He looked Jaden up and down, taking in the water-stained boots, the faded jeans, and the determined set of the jaw. Excuse me? Caleb chuckled, turning back to Leo as if Jaden were merely a distraction. Leo, call security. There is a vagrant in the lobby. Jaden didn't blink. He stepped closer, planting his feet firmly. The $10, Jaden clarified, his tone dropping an octave. You took it from the girl outside. Give it back. Caleb turned fully around now, leaning back against the counter, crossing his arms over his cashmere coat. A smirk played on his lips. Oh, I see. You're the White Knight, the savior of the street rats. Did she send you in here? Is this a shakedown? Caleb laughed, looking around for an audience. You look like you need the $10 more than she does, friend. That jacket, did you buy it at a surplus store or find it in a dumpster? Before Jaden could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps clicked rapidly across the marble. Arthur Huxley, the hotel manager, materialized from a side office. Huxley was a short, rotunded man in his 50s, with a thinning comb-over and a suit that strained the buttons around his midsection. He was sweating despite the climate control, a man perpetually terrified of losing his status. He took one look at the scene, the wealthy, influential Caleb Sterling being confronted by a rough-looking stranger, and immediately chose his side. Mr. Sterling, is everything all right? Huxley gasped, inserting himself between the two men like a human shield made of nervous energy. Is this individual bothering you? Caleb waved a hand dismissively. Just a bit of local wildlife that wandered in, Arthur. He's demanding money, quite aggressive. Huxley's face turned a shade of indignant red as he turned to Jaden. Sir, you need to leave immediately. This is a private establishment. We do not tolerate solicitation or harassment of our VIP guests. Jaden looked down at the manager, his expression unreadable. I'm not soliciting. He stole money from a homeless woman outside. I'm here to collect it. Huxley scoffed a wet, derisive sound. Mr. Sterling is a pillar of this community and the son of our owner. The idea that he would steal from A.A. Beggar is preposterous. You are making a scene. He pointed a shaking finger toward the revolving doors. Leave now, or I will have security physically remove you and press charges for trespassing. Jaden ignored Huxley entirely, his eyes bored into Caleb. You think because you're in here, you're safe. You think the suit makes you a better man. It just makes you a well-dressed thief. Caleb's smirk faltered for a second, stung by the insult in front of the staff. He pushed off the counter, standing to his full height, which was still 2 and shorter than Jaden. You want money? Caleb asked, his voice dripping with malice. He reached into his pocket. The lobby went silent. Even Leo stopped typing, watching with wide, fearful eyes. Caleb pulled out his hand. He wasn't holding a $10 bill. He was holding a quarter. With a flick of his wrist, Caleb tossed the silver coin into the air. It caught the light of the chandelier, spinning lazily, before hitting the pristine marble floor with a sharp, ringing clink. The coin rolled in a circle and settled near Jaden's muddy boot. There, Caleb said, his voice echoing in the hush. That's 25 cents. That's about what your time is worth. Fetch it and get out of my sight." It was a moment of ultimate degradation, a test of dominance. Huxley smirked, crossing his arms, waiting for the vagrant to scramble for the change. But Jaden didn't look at the floor. He didn't move to pick it up. The stillness that came over him was terrifying to anyone who knew what to look for. It was the calm before the trigger pull. The air around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jaden took one slow step forward, bypassing Huxley effortlessly. He moved so close to Caleb that the young heir flinched, stepping back until his expensive coat brushed the reception desk. Jaden leaned in, invading Caleb's space until he could smell the expensive scotch on the young man's breath. He didn't shout. Shouting was for men who were afraid they wouldn't be heard. Jaden whispered, a sound like gravel grinding on concrete. "You think your money is a shield?" Jaden murmured, his eyes locking onto Caleb's pupils, dilating in sudden fear. "But out there in the cold, it's just paper. You made a mistake today. You mistook kindness for weakness." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Keep the money. You're going to need every penny to buy your way out of what comes next if you ever touch her or that dog again. I don't forget faces, and I don't forgive bullies." The menace in his voice was palpable, a promise of violence restrained only by a threat of discipline. Caleb's smile vanished completely. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth to retort, to assert his dominance. But no sound came out. He was suddenly just a boy in a suit facing a man who had hunted wolves. Jaden held the gaze for 3 heartbeats longer than was comfortable, then straightened up. He turned his back on them, ignoring Huxley's sputtered threats, and walked away, leaving the quarter shining lonely on the cold, hard floor. The silence that Jaden had commanded in the lobby was short-lived, shattered not by a shout, but by the ominous chime of the central elevator bank arriving at the ground floor. The golden doors slid open with a smooth, heavy grace, revealing a man who sucked the oxygen out of the room simply by entering it. Silas Sterling stepped out, flanked by 2 assistants who mirrored his stride but kept a respectful distance. Silas, at 62, was a formidable figure, the architect of the Sterling Empire and the owner of the Obsidian. He was a tall man retaining the broad chest of a former collegiate rower, though now softened slightly by decades of fine dining. His hair was a perfectly coiffed mane of steel gray, and he wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that fit him like armor. His face was a map of calculated risks and ruthless victories with deep-set eyes the color of flint that missed nothing. Unlike his son, who projected insecurity masked his arrogance, Silas projected absolute, unshakable authority. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was a command. He took in the scene instantly. The terrified receptionist, Leo, the sweating manager, Huxley, his flushed and embarrassed son, Caleb, and the solitary, unmoving figure of Jaden Nelson, standing amidst the luxury like a jagged rock in a stream. "What is this disturbance?" Silas asked, his voice a deep baritone that carried effortlessly across the marble. Caleb, seeing his father, immediately shed his fear and adopted the posture of a victimized prince. He rushed towards Silas, pointing an accusing finger back at Jaden. "Dad, thank God you're here. This lunatic walked in off the street. He's been threatening me. He tried to mug me right here in the lobby. He's claiming I stole from some beggar outside. Can you believe the audacity?" Caleb's voice whined, rising in pitch, a stark contrast to his father's controlled tone. Silas didn't look at his son. His eyes were fixed on Jaden. He walked past Caleb, ignoring the boy's frantic gestures, and stopped a few feet from the Navy SEAL. Huxley, the manager, scurried to Silas's side, wringing his hands. "Mr. Sterling, sir, I was just about to call the police. This man refused to leave when asked. He's been very aggressive." Silas held up a hand, silencing the manager. He studied Jaden with a look of clinical distaste, scanning him from his worn boots to his alert eyes. "I know your type," Silas said, his voice dripping with a sophisticated kind of venom. "You carry yourself with that rigid, coiled tension. Military, aren't you? Probably enlisted, used to taking orders and breaking things." He stepped closer, invading Jaden's space in a different way than his son had. Not physically, but psychologically. "You return from whatever sandbox you've been playing in, and you think the rules of civilization don't apply to you. You think because you've held a rifle, you have moral authority? Silas chuckled dryly, shaking his head. You are a tool, son, a hammer, and you are looking for a nail in a place where we deal in silken contracts. We pay taxes, so people like you stay at the borders, protecting our interests, not standing in our lobbies, harassing my family. Jaden remained motionless, his face a mask of stone, but inside his mind was racing, not with anger, but with tactical assessment. This was the discipline forged in buds and honed in combat. Emotion was a liability. Information was ammunition. While Silas monologued, Jaden's eyes performed a subtle practice sweep of the perimeter. He wasn't just listening, he was mapping. He clocked a black dome camera mounted discreetly above the concierge desk, its red LED blinking a slow, steady rhythm. Sector 1 covered. He shifted his gaze slightly and spotted another camera, a fisheye lens tucked into the intricate molding of the ceiling near the elevator bank where Silas had emerged. Sector 2 covered. Finally, he noticed a third camera pointed directly at the main entrance revolving doors. The entire lobby was a surveillance grid. Every word Silas said, every lie Caleb had told, and the earlier interaction with the stolen coin, it was all recorded. Jaden stored this information away, a mental file folder labeled leverage. He didn't interrupt Silas. He let the older man dig his own grave with his words. You have nothing to say, Silas pressed, irritated by Jaden's lack of reaction. He expected an outburst, a shout, something to prove his point that Jaden was unhinged. Instead, he got silence. You are a disruption to my guests and a threat to my son, Silas continued, his voice hardening. I don't care about your stories of homeless women or lost dollars in this city. Truth is what I say it is. And right now, the truth is that you are trespassing. Silas turned to Huxley. Arthur, ensure this man is blacklisted. If he steps foot on the pavement in front of this hotel again, call the commissioner directly. Tell him, I want this man arrested for stalking and harassment. I want his commanding officer to receive a letter about his conduct. Silas turned back to Jaden, sneering. Go back to the gutter where you found your friends. You don't belong in the light. The air in the lobby seemed to vibrate with the tension. Leo behind the desk looked down at his shoes, ashamed. Caleb was grinning now, standing behind his father's shoulder like a hyena hiding behind a lion. Yeah, get out, Caleb muttered, emboldened. Jaden finally moved. He didn't lunge. He didn't clench his fists. He simply adjusted his collar and took a step back. But before he turned to leave, he locked eyes with Silas. It wasn't a look of defeat. It was the look a sniper gives a target through a scope. Cold, detached, and knowing. He let his gaze slide to Caleb, then up to the security camera above the concierge, and finally back to Silas. He offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging a transaction had been completed. You're right about one thing, Mr. Sterling, Jaden said, his voice calm, contrasting sharply with the vitriol spewed at him. I am a tool, but you should be careful. Hammers don't just build fences, they tear down walls. The threat was subtle, wrapped in a metaphor, but it landed with the weight of a physical blow. For a fraction of a second, the confidence in Silas's eyes flickered. He felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the door. It was the primal instinct of a man realizing he might have provoked something he didn't fully understand. Jaden turned with military precision and walked toward the revolving doors. He moved with a steady rhythmic gait, his boots echoing one last time on the marble. He didn't look back. He pushed through the glass, exiting the golden cage of the obsidian and stepping back into the biting wind and swirling snow of Chicago. As the doors spun shut behind him, cutting off the warmth, Silas remained standing in the center of the lobby, staring at the empty space where Jaden had been. The older man loosened his tie slightly, a nervous tick he hadn't displayed in years. Arthur, Silas snapped, his voice lacking its earlier smoothness. Get me a drink and get my son out of my sight. The revolving door of the Obsidian Hotel spun shut behind Jaden Nelson, sealing away the golden warmth and the scent of lashes, leaving him once again in the raw, abrasive grip of the Chicago winter. The temperature seemed to have dropped even further in the few minutes he had been inside. The wind was now a physical weight pushing against his chest, carrying stinging pellets of ice that pricked at his exposed face. Jaden didn't immediately walk away. He moved to the side of the grand entrance, leaning his shoulder against a stone pillar near the taxi stand, his hands deep in the pockets of his canvas jacket. To a casual observer, he looked like a man waiting for a ride, defeated and ejected from the palace of the elite. In reality, Jaden was decompressing, his mind replaying the encounter with Silas Sterling, analyzing the threat level, and more importantly, keeping a protective eye on the small, huddled shape across the street. He could see Mia and Ranger still pressed into the doorway. He wanted to cross over to give her the cash in his wallet and perhaps guide her to a shelter, but he knew that approaching her right now with the adrenaline of the confrontation still radiating off him might only frighten her more. He needed to let the situation cool down. He needed to be just a man on a corner, not a threat. Inside the lobby, however, things were heating up. Caleb Sterling was not cooling down. He was boiling. His father's dismissal. "Get my son out of my sight," echoed in his ears, a humiliation that stung worse than any physical slap. Caleb stood near the elevators, watching his father disappear into the private lounge, then turned his gaze toward the glass doors. He saw Jaden standing there. The man wasn't leaving. He was lingering like a stain on the pristine view. Caleb felt a surge of irrational hatred. That man, that tool, as his father called him, had made Caleb look weak. He had made him look like a child in front of the staff. Caleb touched his wrist, feeling the cold, heavy metal of his watch. A PC Philippe Nautilus Platinum, encrusted with subtle diamonds on the bezel. A gift for his 21st birthday, worth more than most people's homes. A dark, malicious idea formed in his mind, sharp and sudden. It was risky, but Caleb was accustomed to the safety net of his surname. He unclasped the watch, the mechanism clicking softly, and slid it into his palm, gripping it tight. He buttoned his cashmere coat, fixed his scarf, and marched toward the exit. He wasn't done. He wanted to destroy the man who dared to look him in the eye. Caleb pushed through the doors, the wind whipping his expensive hair into his eyes immediately. He spotted Jaden instantly. The ex-soldier was looking across the street, distracted. Perfect. Caleb walked briskly toward the taxi stand, finding a distraction of his own, tapping furiously on his phone with his left hand, while his right hand, holding the watch, hung loose by his side. He charted a collision course. As he neared Jaden, he didn't slow down. "Out of the way!" Caleb snapped, shoulders hunched against the wind. He brushed past Jaden aggressively, his right shoulder slamming into Jaden's left side. It was a clumsy, arrogant bump, the kind of physical contact meant to provoke. In that split second of contact, hidden by the flurry of snow and the bulk of their coats, Caleb's hand moved with surprising dexterity. He slipped the heavy platinum watch into the wide-open side pocket of Jaden's cargo jacket. It was a move he had seen in movies, a coward sleight of hand. He felt the weight leave his fingers and settle into the fabric of the stranger's coat. Jaden tensed at the impact. His training screamed threat. His muscles coiled, ready to deflect an attack. But he held back. It was just the spoiled kid again. Jaden looked down at Caleb, who was now stumbling a few feet away, finding a fence. "Watch where you're going, you moron!" Caleb shouted over the wind, turning to glare at Jaden. Jaden didn't respond. He just brushed the snow off his sleeve where Caleb had made contact. He felt a slight heaviness in his pocket, a foreign object that hadn't been there a moment ago. But before his brain could process the tactical data, the trap was sprung. Across the street, the scene was viewed from a different angle. Mia had been watching the hotel entrance with terrified fascination, wondering if the kind stranger who had gone in to fight for her was safe. She saw the silver car's owner, the cruel man, come out. She saw him walk with purpose. She saw the collision, and because she was sitting low to the ground, looking up, she saw what others might have missed. She saw the glint of silver and diamonds flash in Caleb's hand just before he bumped into Jaden. She saw his hand go into the jacket pocket empty and come out empty, but the flash was gone. Her eyes went wide. She grabbed Rears's collar, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Oh no," she whispered into the freezing air. "He put something on him." Ranger let out a low, guttural bark, sensing his mistress's spike in fear. Mia wanted to scream to warn the man, but her voice was frozen in her throat. Who would listen to her? She was invisible. Caleb had walked about 10 yards away when he stopped abruptly. He grabbed his left wrist with his right hand, his face contorting into a mask of theatrical panic. He spun around, eyes wide. "My watch!" he screamed, his voice shrill enough to cut through the wind. "My watch is gone!" He patted his pockets frantically, putting on a show for the doorman and the valet. He took it. "That bum took my watch." Caleb pointed a shaking finger directly at Jaden. "Stop him! He just bumped into me and stole my pate." The reaction was instantaneous. The hotel's security team, already on high alert from the earlier lobby disturbance, burst through the doors. Leading them was Marcus, the head of security. Marcus was a mountain of a man, 6'5", African-American, with a shaved head and a dark suit that struggled to contain his biceps. He was a former linebacker who moved with terrifying speed for his size. Unlike the nervous manager, Huxley, Marcus was a professional, but he was also paid to protect the guests, and the owner's son was the highest priority guest. "Hold it right there!" Marcus bellowed, his voice booming like thunder. Two other uniformed guards flanked him, surrounding Jaden in a practice semicircle. Jaden didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He stood perfectly still, raising his hands slowly to chest level, palms open, the universal sign of non-aggression, but also a combat stance that allowed for quick defense. He looked at Caleb, who was now running back toward them, playing the victim with nauseating enthusiasm. "Search him!" Caleb shrieked, hiding behind Marcus. "He bumped into me and slipped it off my wrist. It's worth $50,000. I want him arrested." Marcus stepped forward, his face grim. "Sir," Marcus said to Jaden, his tone firm but professional, "I need you to keep your hands where I can see them. Mr. Sterling is accusing you of theft." "I didn't steal anything," Jaden said calmly, his eyes locking onto Marcus. "He bumped into me. Check the cameras." "We will," Marcus said, stepping closer. "But right now, I need to pat you down for weapons and contraband. Do not resist." "It's in his pocket," Caleb yelled, pointing at the left pocket of Jaden's jacket, the exact pocket he had planted the evidence in. "I saw him put it there. Check the left pocket." Jaden's eyes narrowed. The heaviness in his pocket suddenly made sense. The bump, the unnatural proximity. It wasn't just aggression, it was a plant. He looked at Caleb, realizing the depth of the boy's pettiness. This wasn't just about money, this was about destroying a reputation. Jaden looked at Marcus. "Be careful," Jaden warned, his voice low. "You're being played." Marcus ignored the warning and reached out, his large hand diving into Jaden's left pocket. He paused, his fingers closing around cold metal. Slowly, Marcus withdrew his hand. Dangling from his thick fingers was the platinum Patek Philippe, the diamonds catching the gray winter light, looking obscenely bright against the backdrop of the dirty street. "Aha!" Caleb shouted, triumphant. I told you he was a thief. Look at that." Caught red-handed, Mia, watching from across the street, covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face. She knew the truth, but the evidence was damning. The security guards grabbed Jaden's arms, forcing them behind his back. Jaden didn't fight them. He knew that resisting now would only give them an excuse to use force and potentially get him shot by the arriving police. He let them restrain him, his face a mask of cold fury, staring directly at Caleb, who was grinning like a Cheshire cat who had just eaten the canary. The discovery of the platinum Pat Filippo in the pocket of Jaden's cargo jacket seemed to freeze time on the sidewalk. The ticking of the expensive watch drowned out by the sudden collective gasp of the onlookers. Marcus, the head of security, held the timepiece up to the gray winter light like a grim trophy, his face a mask of disappointment. He had hoped perhaps that the young heir was lying. It wouldn't have been the first time Caleb Sterling had cried wolf, but the evidence was physical, cold, and undeniable. Caleb let out a hoot of vindication that sounded less like relief and more like the screech of a triumphant vulture. "I knew it! I knew he was trash!" Caleb shouted, pointing a gloved finger at Jaden's chest, staying safely behind the wall of security guards. "You all saw it. He assaulted me and robbed me. That watch is worth $50,000. That's grand larceny. That's a felony." The wind whipped Caleb's scarf around his neck, but he was too energized by his own malice to feel the cold. He turned to Marcus, his eyes wide with manic energy. "Call the police now. I want him in cuffs. I want him booked. I want his life over. Jaden stood in the center of the semicircle of guards, his hands still raised in a non-threatening posture. His breathing was slow and rhythmic, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy swirling around him. He didn't protest. He didn't beg. To the untrained eye, he looked defeated. But inside, Jaden's mind was moving at tactical speed. He analyzed the situation. He was outnumbered. The evidence was planted, and the victim was a man of power. Fighting Marcus would only result in injury and a guaranteed assault charge, which was exactly what Caleb wanted. Jaden's best weapon now was compliance. As Marcus relayed orders into his earpiece, Jaden's eyes drifted past the security team, past the smug face of Caleb, and locked onto the glass revolving doors of the Obsidian. Inside the warm golden lobby, standing just behind the glass, was Leo, the young receptionist. Leo wasn't working. He was standing perfectly still, watching the scene unfold with a look of sheer horror. His hands were gripping the lapels of his uniform jacket, and he was biting his lips so hard it looked like it might bleed. Jaden saw the conflict in the boy's eyes. Leo had seen the lobby footage. Maybe he had even seen Caleb rush out with the watch in his hand. Jaden held Leo's gaze, his expression intense and unwavering. He didn't mouth words. He just projected a silent message. I know you know. Leo flinched as if physically touched and quickly looked away, retreating deeper into the hotel lobby. But he didn't disappear. The seed of guilt had been planted. The police are 2 minutes out, Mr. Sterling, Marcus announced, tucking the watch into an evidence bag he had produced from his jacket. We have the situation contained. Caleb paced back and forth, fueled by adrenaline. 2 minutes. Good. I want to make sure they know who he is. He's dangerous. Look at him. He's probably got a record a mile long. Caleb sneered at Jaden. You picked the wrong guy, soldier boy. I'm going to make sure you get a dishonorable discharge. I'm going to make sure you never find a job again. Not even scrubbing toilets. The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Jaden remained stoic. You seem to know a lot about the military for someone who's never served, Jaden said calmly, his voice carrying over the wind. Discharge requires a court-martial. A civilian court can't touch my service record based on a lie. Caleb laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Money buys justice, friend. My father buys judges. You're done. The wail of sirens cut through the conversation, bouncing off the skyscrapers of downtown Chicago like a frantic heartbeat. Blue and red lights washed over the snow-covered street, painting the faces of the bystanders in strobe light bursts of color. 2 squad cars pulled up to the curb, tires crunching on the ice. The doors opened and 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their holsters. The lead officer was Sergeant Thomas Miller, a man in his late 40s with a face weathered by 20 years on the Chicago force. He had the tired, cynical eyes of a man who had seen everything the city had to throw at him. He was thick around the middle, but moved with the heavy assurance of authority. His partner, a younger rookie named Officer Davis, looked more on edge, scanning the crowd nervously. Miller walked straight to Marcus, nodding familiarly. What do we have, Marcus? Dispatch said. Grand larceny and assault. We have the suspect secured, Tom, Marcus said, gesturing to Jaden. Mr. Sterling here alleges the suspect bumped into him and removed a PC Philippe watch from his wrist. We searched the suspect and found the watch in his left jacket pocket. Marcus held up the evidence bag. The watch glittered accusingly under the police lights. Miller let out a long sigh, his breath pluming in the cold air. He looked at Caleb, who was practically vibrating with excitement. He stole it, officer. I want to press full charges. He's violent. He threatened me in the lobby earlier. Miller turned his gaze to Jaden. He saw a man standing still, hands visible, posture erect, but not aggressive. Miller had arrested hundreds of scales, drunks, and desperate thieves in his career. Jaden didn't fit the profile. The man stood too still. He was too calm. Turn around, hands behind your back, Miller ordered, his voice flat. Jaden complied immediately, moving with a fluid precision that made Miller pause for a fraction of a second. Miller stepped forward, pulling the handcuffs from his belt. As he grabbed Jaden's wrist to apply the cuff, his thumb brushed against the leather wallet in Jaden's back pocket, which was protruding slightly due to the position of his stance. I need to check your ID. Miller grunted, pulling the wallet out before snapping the cuffs on. He opened the biffled leather wallet. The first thing that caught the flashing blue light wasn't a driver's license. It was a military ID card, and tucked behind it a challenge coin with the distinct gold trident of the Naval Special Warfare Command, the SEALs. Miller froze. He looked closer at the ID. Lieutenant Jaden Nelson. He looked at the coin again. Miller was a Marine veteran himself. He knew what that trident meant. It meant the man he was arresting wasn't just a soldier. He was an elite operator, one of the few who endured the hardest training on Earth to do the jobs no one else could. Miller looked up, his eyes meeting Jaden's over the suspect's shoulder. There was a moment of silent communication between the two men, a recognition of shared sacrifice and the unspoken code of brotherhood. The roughness in Miller's demeanor evaporated instantly. He didn't loosen the grip on the handcuffs. Protocol was protocol, and the evidence was damning. But his tone shifted completely. "Your active duty?" Miller asked quietly, his voice low so only Jaden could hear. Jaden nodded once. "Yes, sir, on leave." Miller closed the wallet slowly, sliding it into his own pocket for safekeeping, rather than tossing it into the evidence bag with the watch. He looked at Caleb, who was shouting at the rookie officer about how slow they were moving. Miller felt a sour taste in his mouth. He knew the Sterling reputation. He knew money often made people think they could rewrite reality. And he looked at Jaden, a man who served his country, now standing accused of petty theft by a rich kid in a cashmere coat. It didn't add up. The gut instinct that had kept Miller alive for 2 decades was screaming that this was a setup. "Officer, why are you whispering to him? Cuff him," Caleb yelled, stepping closer. Miller turned on his heel, his face hardening. "Back up, Mr. Sterling," Miller barked, his voice commanding. "I am conducting an arrest. Do not interfere with police procedure, or I will cite you for obstruction." Caleb blinked, stunned by the rebuke. Miller turned back to Jaden. He clicked the cuffs onto Jaden's wrists, but he did it gently, ensuring they weren't too tight. He leaned in close to Jaden's ear. "Look, Lieutenant, I have to take you in. The watch was on you. It's probable cause." But Miller paused, glancing at the hotel, then at the manic Caleb, and finally back to Jaden. "But I don't buy this story for a second. You don't survive the teams just to come home and lift a watch from a punk like that." Jaden's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you, Sergeant," Jaden whispered. Miller took Jaden's arm, not dragging him, but guiding him with a respectful grip. "Let's go. We'll sort this out at the station. Don't say another word to anyone until you have a lawyer." As Miller led Jaden toward the squad car, Caleb shouted after them. "That's right. Take the trash away. Enjoy prison, G.I. Joe." Miller slammed the car door shut, cutting off Caleb's voice and closing Jaden in the sudden silence of the back seat. Through the wire mesh, Jaden watched the world outside. He saw Caleb high-fiving a hesitant Huxley. He saw Marcus looking grim, and across the street, illuminated by the tragic spin of the police lights, he saw Mia standing up holding Ranger, her hand covering her mouth in horror. She looked like she was about to run across the street to scream the truth, but she was paralyzed by fear. Jaden locked eyes with her one last time as the car engine revved, trying to send her strength. He was in the system now, trapped in Caleb's game, but he had found an unexpected ally in Sergeant Miller, and he knew the war wasn't over. It had just moved to a different battlefield. The back of the police cruiser was a cage of hard plastic and stale air, smelling faintly of disinfectant and old sweat. A stark removal from the crisp winter wind outside. Jaden Nelson sat with his hands cuffed behind his back, the metal biting into his wrists. But his mind was not on the discomfort. He was processing the tactical situation with the cold calculation of a chess master who had just sacrificed a knight to trap the queen. Through the wire mesh that separated the back seat from the front, he saw Sergeant Miller pausing before getting into the driver's seat. Miller was hesitating, his hand resting on the roof of the car, looking back at the hotel with a scowl that etched deep lines into his weathered face. He didn't want to make this arrest. He knew it was wrong. Jaden leaned forward, pressing his face near the mesh. "Sergeant," Jaden said, his voice calm but urgent. "Sergeant Miller." Miller turned, opening the rear door slightly, creating a crack of freezing air. "Save it, Lieutenant. I told you we'll talk at the station. I can't do anything here with that crowd watching." I know, Jaden replied, keeping his voice low. But before we leave, I need a moment. I want to apologize to Mr. Sterling. Miller's eyebrows shot up, disappearing under the rim of his cap. He looked at Jaden as if the seal had suddenly spoken in a foreign language. You want to what? Apologize to that little to him? Miller asked, incredulous coloring his tone. Jaden nodded, his expression the picture of defeated humility. Yes, I overstepped. I caused a scene. If I apologize now, maybe he won't press for the maximum sentence? Please, Sergeant, just 1 minute. Miller studied Jaden's face, searching for the lie. But Jaden's training in deception was world-class. Miller didn't see a lie. He saw a man trying to salvage his career. But deep down, Miller also sensed something else, a current of strategy beneath the surface. He looked over his shoulder at Caleb Sterling, who was standing on the curb, wrapping his scarf tighter, looking like a king surveying a conquered village. All right, Miller grunted, making a decision. 1 minute, but if he starts anything, I'm shutting this door and we are gone. Miller stepped back and waved Caleb over. Mr. Sterling, the suspect has something he wants to say to you before we transport him. Caleb blinked, surprised. He had expected the police to just drive away. A slow, poisonous smile spread across his face. This was better than he had hoped. Not only had he framed the man, but now the man was going to beg. It was the ultimate victory for his fragile ego. Caleb strutted toward the police car, his Italian leather shoes crunching on the snow, his posture radiating arrogance. He stopped a few feet from the open door, looking down his nose at Jaden, who sat in the shadows of the back seat. Well, Caleb sneered, crossing his arms. I'm listening. Make it good, and maybe I'll tell my lawyers not to destroy your pension. While this drama unfolded on the street, a quieter internal war was being waged inside the golden lobby of the Obsidian. Leo, the young receptionist, was still standing behind the glass, his hands trembling. He had watched the arrest. He had watched Marcus pull the watch out of the pocket. He knew with absolute certainty that Jaden hadn't stolen it. He had seen Caleb rushing out, the glint of the watch in his hand, the malicious intent in his stride. Leo looked away from the police car and cast his gaze across the street. There, shivering in the doorway, was Mia. She wasn't looking at the police car anymore. She was looking at the hotel. She was looking at him. Her eyes were wide, filled with tears and a silent, desperate plea. She looked so small against the vast, cold city. Leo felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He saw himself in her, powerless, voiceless, crushed by people like the Steerings. He thought about his job, the meager paycheck that barely covered his rent, the constant fear of upsetting Mr. Huxley. Was this who he wanted to be? A silent accomplice to a crime? The warmth of the lobby suddenly felt suffocating, the scent of leaves clawing and sickening, like flowers at a funeral for his own conscience. He took a step toward the door, then stopped, his heart hammering against his ribs. The fear of Silas Sterling was a physical weight paralyzing him, but the image of Mia's tear-streaked face was a fire burning through that fear. Back at the curb, the wind seemed to die down, creating a pocket of silence around the police car. Jaden looked up at Caleb. He slumped his shoulders slightly, feigning resignation. I just wanted to say you won, Jaden said, his voice soft, forcing Caleb to lean in closer to hear him over the idling engine. I shouldn't have come in here. I shouldn't have challenged you. I see that now. Caleb let out a short, sharp laugh. Finally, some intelligence. You realized you were out of your league, soldier. You people always think muscle matters. It doesn't. Influence matters. Caleb leaned closer, his face inches from the open door frame, eager to drink in every drop of Jaden's submission. Is that all? Because I have a dinner reservation. Jaden's expression shifted. The look of defeat evaporated instantly, replaced by the same cold, predatory focus he had shown in the lobby. He locked eyes with Caleb, his gaze piercing through the young heir's facade. I just have one question, Caleb, Jaden said, dropping the Mr. Sterling title. The sudden change in tone made Caleb blink. You went to a lot of trouble today. The lies, the scene in the lobby, planting the watch. It seems desperate. Jaden lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, a masterclass in the psychological provocation. Is it because underneath that expensive coat you're actually terrified of me? Did you have to use a cheap trick because you knew you couldn't stand up to me like a real man? The question struck the exact center of Caleb's insecurity. It bypassed his logic and hit the raw nerve of his inadequacy, the deep-seated fear that he was nothing without his father's money, that he was weak. Caleb's face flushed a violent red. His composure shattered. He forgot about the police officer standing nearby. He forgot about the bystanders. He only felt the burning need to assert his dominance, to crush the arrogance of this man who dared to pity him from the back of a squad car. Caleb lunged forward, grabbing the frame of the car door, his face twisting into a snarl. He leaned his head into the car, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss intended only for Jaden's ears. "Scared of you," Caleb spat, his eyes wide and manic. "Don't flatter yourself. You're nothing. You're trash. I could buy and sell your entire life with my allowance." He grinned, a look of pure malice. "I put that watch in your pocket because I could, because it was easy. And guess what? Nobody cares. Nobody is going to believe a word you say against me. I framed you. I own the truth. And you're going to rot in a cell knowing that I did it, and there's nothing you can do about it." The confession hung in the air between them, explicit and undeniable. Caleb pulled back, feeling a rush of triumph. He had said it. He had admitted it to the man's face, rubbing salt in the wound, confident in his immunity. "Have a nice trip," Caleb mocked, straightening his coat. But as he looked at Jaden, he didn't see fear. He didn't see anger. He saw Jaden's smile. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the terrifying, satisfied smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. Jaden shifted his gaze past Caleb, looking toward the front seat where Sergeant Miller was standing. Caleb followed his gaze and froze. Sergeant Miller wasn't looking at the traffic. He was looking directly at Caleb, his face thunderous, and in his hand, held low near his belt, but clearly visible, was a small digital voice recorder, the kind officers used for dictating notes, and the red record light was glowing steady and bright. Jaden leaned back against the seat, the tension leaving his body. "You're right, Caleb," Jaden said, his voice returning to its normal volume. "Nobody would believe my word against yours. That's why I needed you to say it yourself." The blood drained from Caleb's face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stared at the recorder in Miller's hand, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The arrogance, the wealth, the power, it all dissolved in the face of his own recorded voice. Miller stepped forward, his hand moving from the recorder to the pair of handcuffs on his belt. The dynamic on the street shifted violently. The predator had become the prey. The silence that followed the revelation of Sergeant Miller's digital recorder was absolute. A vacuum in the center of the windy Chicago street that sucked the air right out of Caleb Sterling's lungs. The young heir stood frozen, his mouth still slightly open, his eyes fixed on the small red light that had just captured his arrogant confession for posterity. It was a look of total incomprehensible shock, the look of a man who had walked through life believing gravity didn't apply to him, only to suddenly find himself plummeting from a cliff. Jaden Nelson, sitting comfortably in the back of the cruiser, despite the handcuffs, finally allowed a genuine smile to break through his stoic mask. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the cold, satisfied expression of a tactician watching a trap spring shut. He shifted slightly, leaning toward the mesh divider. "2 is 1, and 1 is none, Sergeant," Jaden said, his voice calm and clear. "Standard operating procedure." I knew he'd try to spin a narrative. With a subtle movement of his shoulder, Jaden indicated his own chest pocket, where the outline of a smartphone was visible. I tapped record on my phone the second his security team surrounded me. It's been running this whole time. It picked up him planting the watch, his lies to Marcus, and every word he just whispered to me. Caleb stumbled back a step, his face draining of color until it matched the dirty snow at his feet. "No," he stammered, his voice trembling. That's illegal. You can't record me without my consent. That's entrapment." Sergeant Miller clipped the recorder back onto his belt, his face set in stone. "Actually, Mr. Sterling," Miller said, his tone dripping with professional satisfaction, "Illinois is a two-party consent state for private conversations, but you are standing on a public sidewalk screaming at a police officer and a detainee in front of a crowd. There is no expectation of privacy here. Everything you just said is admissible, and frankly, It's the most honest thing you've said all day. Miller reached for his radio, his eyes never leaving Caleb. Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Alpha. Upgrade the call. We have a confirmed false report and potential obstruction of justice. Send a transport wagon. Just as Caleb looked like he might faint or run, the revolving doors of the Obsidian Hotel spun open with a frantic urgency. Leo, the young receptionist, burst out into the cold. He wasn't wearing his coat. He was just in his thin uniform, shivering violently against the wind. But the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. He clutched a sleek black tablet to his chest as if it were a shield. Leo, a 22-year-old who had spent his entire life being invisible and obedient, was crossing a line from which he could never return. He ran past the stunned doorman, past the imposing figure of Marcus, the security chief, and stopped right in front of Sergeant Miller. "Officer, wait!" Leo gasped, his breath pluming in the air. "Don't take him away. The soldier, he didn't do it." Caleb whirled around, seeing the employee. "Leo, what are you doing? Get back inside!" Caleb shrieked, his voice cracking. "You're fired. Do you hear me? You're fired!" Leo ignored him, a feat of courage that surprised even himself. He turned the tablet around, facing Miller and Marcus. "I saw what happened," Leo said, his voice gaining strength. "I was watching the monitors. I knew Mr. Sterling was upset, so I pulled the feed from the exterior camera, the one hidden in the pillar. It has a blind spot for the main entrance, but it covers the taxi stand perfectly." Leo tapped the screen with a shaking finger. "Look, the video played in high definition. Even on the small screen, the image was damning. It showed Caleb walking out, checking his phone, and then clearly, undeniably, slipping the watch off his wrist. It showed the collision. It showed the watch sliding from Caleb's hand into Jaden's wide pocket. It was irrefutable visual proof of the crime. Marcus, the head of security, stepped closer, squinting at the screen. He was a man who prided himself on doing his job, on protecting the hotel. But he was not a corrupt man. He watched the footage, his jaw tightening. He looked at the Patek Philippe still in the evidence bag, then at the tablet, and finally at Caleb. The realization that he had been used as a pawn in a rich kid's petty game washed over him. Marcus straightened up, his loyalty shifting in an instant from the paycheck to the truth. "That's a clean angle," Marcus rumbled, his deep voice carrying authority. "That's a plant. He set him up." Marcus turned to Miller. "Officer, I formally retract my statement against this man. Security was manipulated." "You traitor!" Caleb screamed, lunging toward Leo. "Give me that." But before he could reach the receptionist, Marcus stepped in between them, a human wall of muscle. "Stand down, Mr. Sterling," Marcus warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't make this worse." The commotion had reached a fever pitch, and the doors of the hotel opened again. This time it was Silas Sterling. The patriarch stepped out, not with the panic of his son, but with the irritation of a man whose dinner was being interrupted. He wore his coat draped over his shoulders like a cape. He surveyed the scene, the police, his shivering employee, his hysterical son, and the crowd of onlookers that had gathered. Silas walked straight to Sergeant Miller, ignoring everyone else. "Sergeant," Silas said, his voice smooth and commanding, "this has gone on long enough. My son is upset. The man is a thief. Let's finish this paperwork inside away from the spectacle." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a business card embossed with gold leaf. "I'm sure the commissioner would prefer we handle this with discretion." Miller looked at the card, then at Silas. He didn't take it. "Mr. Sterling," Miller said, his voice projecting loudly for the crowd, "your son just confessed to framing this man. We have it on audio, and we have video evidence of him planting the watch provided by your own staff." Silas froze. The smooth veneer cracked. He looked at Caleb, who was sobbing now, and then at Leo, who stood defiantly holding the tablet. "Video," Silas hissed. He looked around and suddenly realized the true danger. It wasn't the police, it was the audience. A dozen smartphones were held aloft by tourists and passers-by, their camera lenses glowing like judgmental eyes. The red recording dots were everywhere. This wasn't a private dispute he could smother with money. This was a viral moment happening in real time. Your Sterling scandal was probably already trending. "Dad, fix it," Caleb wailed, grabbing his father's arm. Tell them who we are. Silas looked at his son with a mixture of disgust and calculation. He saw the recording devices. He saw the stern faces of the officers. He saw the turning tide. To fight this now publicly would be suicide for his brand. The only move left was damage control. Silas pulled his arm away from Caleb's grip, a physical rejection that was more painful than a slap. "Be quiet, Caleb," Silas snapped. He turned to Miller, his face a mask of cold neutrality. "If my son has broken the law, then he must face the consequences. The Sterling family does not condone dishonesty." The betrayal hit Caleb harder than the cold. His jaw dropped. "Dad," he whispered. "What? What are you doing?" Silas didn't look at him. He looked at Jaden, who was being uncuffed by Officer Davis. Jaden rubbed his wrists, stepping out of the car, a free man. He looked at Silas, their eyes meeting across the snowy divide. Silas offered a stiff, barely perceptible nod, a concession of defeat from one warlord to another. Jaden didn't return it. He didn't need to. He walked over to Leo, who was still trembling. Jaden placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You did a brave thing, Leo," Jaden said quietly. "You saved me." Leo looked up, tears of relief in his eyes. "It was the right thing," Leo whispered. Miller stepped forward, pulling his handcuffs out again, but this time he walked past Jaden. He walked up to Caleb Sterling. "Caleb Sterling, you are under arrest for filing a false police report, obstruction of justice, and disorderly conduct," Miller recited, spinning Caleb around. The click of the cuffs was the loudest sound on the street. Caleb began to scream, begging his father, begging Marcus, begging anyone to help, but no one moved. Silas turned on his heel and walked back into the hotel, closing the door on his son, prioritizing the empire over the heir. The crowd erupted into low murmurs and applause as Caleb was guided into the back of the very squad car he had intended for Jaden. Jaden watched it all, standing tall in the snow. The tool that had just dismantled the master's house. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser carrying Caleb Sterling faded into the swirling white snow of the Chicago evening, leaving behind a heavy silence that felt louder than the sirens. The spectacle was over, but the energy on the street had shifted permanently. The onlookers, previously just passive observers of a rich man's world, now murmured with a mix of vindication and shock, their breath pluming in the cold air as they reviewed the footage on their phones that would soon dominate the evening news. Inside the golden cage of the Obsidian Hotel, the atmosphere was funereal. Silas Sterling stood in the center of the lobby, the heat of the fireplace doing nothing to warm the chill in his bones. He watched the revolving doors spin, marking the exit of his son and the destruction of his family's carefully curated image. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers stiff. "Get me the legal team," he barked into the receiver, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "And get the PR crisis firm. I want a statement drafted 10 minutes ago." But as he looked around, he saw the staff, the bellhops, the concierge, even the cleaners looking at him, not with the usual fearful reverence, but with thinly veiled judgment. He realized with a sinking feeling that no amount of money could scrub the internet clean of the video showing his son planting evidence, nor could it erase his own callous abandonment of that son to save face. The empire was still standing, but the king was naked, stripped of his dignity, by a man who owned nothing but the clothes on his back. Outside, the wind bit at Jaden Nelson's face, but he didn't feel it. He felt lighter. He turned to Leo, the young receptionist, who was still shivering in his thin uniform, clutching the tablet like a lifeline. "You should get back inside, Leo," Jaden said, his voice rumbling with genuine warmth. "It's freezing out here." Leo looked at the hotel, then back at Jaden, a conflicted look on his face. "I don't know if I have a job to go back to," Leo admitted, his voice shaky. "Mr. Sterling isn't the forgiving type." Before Jaden could respond, Marcus, the massive head of security, stepped forward. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder. "You go back inside, son," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying a new tone of respect. "If Huxley tries to fire you for telling the truth, he'll have to fire me and the entire night shift too. We saw what you did. You stood tall." Marcus looked at Jaden and offered a firm nod, a soldier salute in civilian clothes. I apologize for my part in this, Lieutenant. I assume the suit made the man. I was wrong. Jaden returned the nod. Water under the bridge. Marcus, keep an eye on the kid. With the loose ends at the hotel tied up, Jaden turned his attention to the most important mission of the day. He adjusted his backpack and walked across the street, his boots crunching rhythmically on the snow-packed asphalt. Mia was still standing in the doorway of the closed boutique, clutching Arias' collar. She looked terrified, a ruck, and incredibly fragile, like a porcelain doll left out in a storm. As Jaden approached, Ranger didn't growl. The puppy, sensing the change in the atmosphere, and perhaps smelling the absence of aggression in the newcomer, simply wagged his tail hesitantly, his ears perked forward. Jaden stopped a few feet away, dropping to one knee to bring himself to eye level with the girl and her dog. He didn't loom over them. He made himself smaller, less threatening. He's gone, Jaden said softly, gesturing back toward the empty street where the police car had been. He won't bother you again. Mia wiped a tear from her cheek with a dirty mitten. I saw what you did, she whispered, her voice cracking. You went in there for me. Why? You don't even know me. Jaden smiled, an expression that softened the hard lines of his face. I know enough. I know you didn't deserve that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He took out all the cash he had, about $200 in 20s, and held it out to her. Mia hesitated, her eyes widening. I can't take that. It's too much. Jaden gently took her hand and pressed the money into her palm, closing her fingers over it. It's not charity, Mia. It's a refund, plus interest for the trouble. He didn't stop there. He pulled out his smartphone and dialed a number he knew by heart. I have a friend, Jaden explained as the phone rang. Her name is Elena. She runs a place called The Hearth about 6 blocks from here. It's a support center for veterans, but they help families and people in crisis too. A moment later, a voice answered on the other end. Jaden, is that you? You're supposed to be on vacation, Jaden chuckled. I am Elena, but I've got a situation. I'm on Michigan Avenue. I have a young woman here, Mia, and a German Shepherd puppy named Ranger. They're out in the cold. Do you have room? He listened for a moment, nodding. Yeah, I know no pets usually, but this dog is her family. He's well behaved. Vouch for him? Yeah, I vouch for him. I vouch for both of them. He paused, listening to Elena's instructions. Okay, I'm sending them over now in a cab. Put it on my tab. Thanks, Elena. He hung up and looked back at Mia, whose jaw had dropped. Elena is expecting you, Jaden said, standing up and hailing a passing taxi with a sharp whistle. She has a warm room, a hot meal, and she loves dogs. You can stay there as long as you need to get back on your feet. No questions asked. The taxi pulled up and Jaden opened the rear door. Mia stood up, her legs trembling. She looked at the warm interior of the cab, then at the money in her hand, and finally at the stranger who had changed her life in the span of an hour. She didn't know what to say. The words, thank you, felt woefully inadequate. She threw her arms around Jaden's waist, burying her face in his jacket, sobbing uncontrollably. Jaden stiffened for a second. He wasn't used to hugs, but then he awkwardly patted her back. It's okay, he murmured. Go get warm. He helped her into the car and Ranger hopped in beside her, curling up on the seat immediately. Jaden handed the driver a $50 bill through the window. Take them to the Hearth on 4th Street. Keep the change. As the taxi drove away, carrying Mia and Ranger toward a safer future, Jaden stood alone on the sidewalk. The snow was falling harder now, turning the city into a white blur. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the sharp, clean air. He felt the weight of the PC Felipe incident, the anger at Silas, and the sadness of the city wash away, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. He looked back at the Obsidian Hotel one last time. Through the glass, he could see Silas Sterling yelling at someone on his phone, trapped in his golden box of stress and ruin. Jaden adjusted the strap of his backpack, turned his collar up against the wind, and began to walk. He wasn't heading back to the coffee shop, and he wasn't heading to a hotel. He was heading to the train station to continue his journey home to his own family. He walked with the steady, rhythmic gait of a man who had walked through deserts and mountains, a solitary figure moving through the urban tundra. He didn't need the applause, and he didn't need the recognition. He was a sheepdog in a world of wolves, and today the flock was safe. As he disappeared into the snowy mist, the city seemed a little less cold, warmed not by the sun, but by the small, defiant act of justice he had left behind. If this story touched your heart, please help us spread this message of kindness and justice by sharing this video with your friends and family. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that feed the soul. May God grant you the eyes to see the needs of others, the courage to stand up for what is right, and the heart to be a shelter in the storm for those who are cold. If you believe that God is the ultimate judge and that justice will always prevail, type Amen in the comments section below.